The role of the animal charity, the RSPCA, is up for discussion today at Westminster. There'll be a parliamentary debate over the charity's record on private prosecutions under animal welfare legislation. They did this most notably last December against the Heythrop Hunt in Oxfordshire collectively and its masters and employees for breaching the Hunting Act. The charity spent £300,000 bringing the prosecution. They've also been accused of unfairly using the law against children and people with learning difficulties. The parliamentary debate has been requested by Simon Hart, the Conservative MP for Carmarthen West. He says the RSPCA should leave it to the Crown Prosecution Service to bring cases to court. And we'll hear from Simon Hart in a moment. But first, Gavin Grant, the Chief Executive of the RSPCA, defended their use of private prosecutions.
The RSPCA always has done it. We were founded in 1824. Our inspectorate are older than the Metropolitan Police Force, and it's a matter of record that we have taken prosecutions against those that abuse animals over the centuries. Indeed, the first one taken by our founder, Richard Martin, even predated 1824.
There's been particular criticism that you're too heavy-handed in prosecuting people where it serves no purpose. For example, children or people with learning difficulties, about neglect or cruelty to animals. Shouldn't you be more understanding in those circumstances?
Well, indeed, we are. And to be clear for your listeners, there's two bases for prosecution. The first is that the evidence is clear, and the RSPCA meets the same standards as the Crown Prosecution Service on assessing evidence, and indeed our 98% plus success rate demonstrates.
That's not really the point as to whether it succeeds or fails, is it?
Well, it is, firstly, because it shows that there aren't frivolous prosecutions being taken. The RSPCA investigates something like 120 to 130,000 cases of cruelty. We prosecute 2,000 of those cases. So what's that? Barely 1.5% of the prosecutions taken. And by the way, in terms of the money that's expended, it's less than 5% of the money this charity spends on animal welfare goes on prosecuting those people.
Is the RSPCA carrying out more prosecutions than it did 10 years ago?
The number of prosecutions that the RSPCA takes varies from year to year, and that variation will be according to two factors. Firstly, of course, the individual merits of a case. Is the evidence there? Is it in public interest to prosecute? And secondly, the volume of cases that we're examining. Now, sadly, cruelty and abandonment to animals, perhaps as part of the current recession, as part of a throwaway society, is on the rise.
Do you think your agenda has become more about animal rights, whereas it used to be more about animal welfare?
It's all about animal welfare, and it's all about the prevention of cruelty to animals. 95% of the RSPCA's work is a practical work of educating people to treat animals with compassion and respect, and helping those animals that are the subject of vicious neglect and abuse, trying to put them back in veterinary terms and psychological terms into happy new homes, and promoting responsible animal husbandry and welfare on the farms through our Freedom Food Scheme. Nothing has changed.
And in December of last year, you told us on Farming Today that anyone who chooses to break the animal welfare law is an enemy of animals and an enemy of the RSPCA. Do you still feel that?
Anybody who is going out there quite deliberately, either for fun or for profit, to break the law and to abuse animals is clearly an enemy of the animals and an enemy of the RSPCA, but above all, they're the enemy of the civilised people of this country. And I do believe that the law of this land is there to protect animals, and it needs to be enforced. Otherwise, laws fall into disrespect, and somehow there's a sense that there's permission to abuse animals. The RSPCA will never allow that, and nor will the people of this country.
Gavin Grant, Chief Executive of the RSPCA. Well, Simon Hart, MP, is the former Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance, an organisation which supports hunting. I put it to Mr Hart that the RSPCA was perfectly within its rights to bring private prosecutions if it wished.
All I'm saying is if people want to bring private prosecutions, which they are perfectly entitled to do, they must do so in a way which is absolutely free from any kind of political or commercial interest. The CPS exists, Crown Prosecution Service exists to make sure that the public is protected from prosecutions which may be driven by some other curious or perverse motive. The RSPCA doesn't have that check or that balance. And all I'm suggesting is if it wishes to carry out private prosecutions, then it must do so to the highest possible and transparent standards. And if we can achieve that from the debate, then we've made some progress.
So are you saying that they don't achieve those high standards?
I'm sure they are in some cases, but I think they are influenced by the very strong political agenda that they run, the very thirsty commercial needs of the organisation. I think those are influences which the police would never get away with. The police have to gather evidence.
But just clarify for me exactly where you see a conflict of interest then.
In choosing which case to run, I am concerned, as are plenty of other people, that in the list of things that you consider does this particular case advance our political agenda? Does it help fill our coffers by becoming high profile and perhaps newsworthy? Is it in the public interest? I don't think it necessarily is when you are applying a political and a commercial factor to your considerations.
The RSPCA would say that they do not prosecute to get commercial gain or political advantage, that they are there to protect animals and that they are trying to help the implementation of the Animal Welfare Act.
Well, they can perfectly well do that through the Crown Prosecution Service and the police. No other charity prosecutes, no other animal welfare charity prosecutes, not even the RSPCA prosecutes on child abuse cases. They're all perfectly happy to rely on the independent and objective CPS. The RSPCA is unique in this respect.
However, Gavin Grant has said to me that they've always done this. There has been no change in what they're doing, and they've always done this.
Well, I'm not convinced that just because we've always done something, that means we should always carry on doing it, regardless. The fact is, the leadership of the RSPCA has, I think, moved worryingly from an animal welfare base, which we could all support, to a much more sort of political, edgy animal rights agenda. With the Hunting Act case over Christmas, they chose the highest profile hunt in the constituency of the Prime Minister.
But wasn't it the case that that was the hunt that had been breaking rules and they were found guilty? And isn't it the case that as a former chief executive of the Countryside Alliance, that is what has annoyed you and that's why you're bringing this debate?
No, I think it's perfectly logical that I've taken an interest in the RSPCA for 20 years. I was a member for a very long time. Of course, I have, if you like, an insight into what they get up to. And I have no problem. If they want to go and prosecute the Heythrop Hunt, or any other hunt for that matter, I have no problem with that whatsoever. But I think the process by which they choose their prosecutions and the way in which they do it should be independently verified.
But the problem is that CPS is quite a cumbersome beast, isn't it? And I believe the RSPCA feels that it's more efficient to bring a prosecution privately than to use the CPS, which might have long delays.
Well, that's not a problem which is expressed, that's not a fear which is expressed by every other animal welfare charity in the UK. It's not a fear that is expressed by any human and child welfare charity. So why is that unique to the RSPCA? No other charity does this. It's all about accountability and transparency, the sort of political cliches. And, the RSPCA has demonstrated that it pursues a very strong and visible and aggressive political agenda. And it's entitled to do that. I have no problem with that. But it can't be judge and jury. It can be one or the other, but I suspect it can't be both.
Simon Hart MP, and that debate will be in Westminster Hall at 9:30 this morning. That's all for today. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Emma Wetherill.
Caroline Lucas.
Very much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Williams. I understand that I have to put on the public record that I'm a member, a proud member, and a vice president of the RSPCA. I'm also proud of the fact that the UK has laws protecting animals from abuse and neglect. There's always room for improvement, but I believe that, taken as a whole, this legislation is one of the markers of a civilised society, a society that refuses to condone cruelty or tolerate the exploitation of other species. Now, the honourable member who has secured this debate...
Neil Griffith.
Welfare Bill in 2006. when we make legislation, we really do want it to be enforced. Would you agree that there's absolutely no point in designing legislation, making sure that it is workable, that it's enforceable, if then there is no enforcement of that legislation?
Well, I would completely agree with her, and that's why I find it so extraordinary that somehow upholding the law is being regarded as some kind of political or worse, party political act. I don't quite get that. But I did want to say that I was interested to note the honourable member who secured this debate has been very coy about not mentioning the H word, and I would suggest that's probably because he realises that he's actually lost his case on that. We've got the very clear guidance from the Charity Commissioners saying that the Commission does not consider that the trustees have breached their duty of prudence in the case of this prosecution. So having lost that case, he's now hitting out wildly with a lot of accusations not based on evidence about prosecutions more generally. Well, like the vast majority of members of the public, I strongly support the Hunting Act. I'm not afraid of using the H word, and I'm committed to strengthening its provisions as well as seeing the ban on the use of dogs in chasing and killing wild mammals rigorously upheld. And as the honourable member said, as with other legislation designed to protect animals or anything else, enforcement is critical, and that's why bringing prosecutions is so important. And the RSPCA is uniquely placed to carry out that task. Colleagues will know that in 2005, a Parliamentary Select Committee concluded that the RSPCA was the only organisation with the requisite expertise to undertake animal welfare prosecutions. And the Association of Chief Police Officers has also gone on the record to pay tribute to the importance of this role and its fulfilment of the RSPCA. They have said, and I quote, "Were the RSPCA as a charity to decide next week not to do this work anymore, none of the rest of us in the public service could pick it up. Animal welfare would not be furthered, it would be significantly disadvantaged." And so thanks to their excellent and consistent best practice, in 2010 the RSPCA secured the convictions of 2,441 defendants for animal welfare offences. They gave out 86,000 welfare improvement notices under the Animal Welfare Act. In 2011, a total of 3,114 convictions were secured, further reinforcing the message that the law is essential to its work as a charity charged with protecting animals from abuse. Now, this work as a private prosecutor is clearly identified in the RSPCA's constitution as part of its charitable aims, which include preventing or suppressing cruelty towards animals. In the charity's own words, upholding the law is not a political act, but is in direct furtherance of the RSPCA's charitable purpose. That said, they do quite rightly have a clear duty to ensure that any prosecutions undertaken meet both the public interest test and are backed up by strong evidence that animal cruelty is taking place. As the Charity Commission puts it, and I quote, "If considering a prosecution, charities must consider whether bringing a prosecution is a reasonable and effective use of the charity's resources, what the prospects of success are, and whether the public interest is served by a prosecution." So let me take each of those considerations in turn in relation to the decision to prosecute the Heythrop Hunt, as this case in particular is what seems to have prompted this debate this morning.
No,
Does the honourable member agree with the district judge who thought the amount of money wasn't proportionate? He said that £320,000 on this particular case that was referred to was staggering. And isn't it the case that donors' money could be put to better use?
That's absolutely right.
We'll come to that in just a moment, and there are very many reasons why that amount of money had to be spent. I don't suppose any of us would choose to spend money in that way, but I would come back to the wonderful comment by my friend from Newport, that if people stopped breaking the law, the RSPCA wouldn't have to keep spending this money. Now, given that the RSPCA has a 98% success rate in making a prosecution compared to 50% of the CPS, they would seem to be pretty well practiced at assessing whether or not a case looks set to succeed. As members will know, in the instance of the Heythrop Hunt, the charity's judgment was correct and a conviction was secured. This was a landmark case and the first time that a hunt has faced corporate charges for illegal hunting. It was also the first case brought by the RSPCA for breaches of the Hunting Act. Now, that case was based on footage of foxes being chased by dogs filmed on several occasions during November 2011 and February and March 2012 in Gloucestershire and Oxfordshire. An expert analysis verified that the offences were being committed deliberately. Now, I suggest that all of that indicates the charity did think very carefully before bringing a prosecution under the Hunting Act. They considered the evidence before them and judged accurately that the case was likely to be won. They assessed the impact of the case in acting as a deterrent and in sending out a clear message about upholding the ban on dogs chasing and killing wild mammals, thus preventing animal cruelty. And judging by the interest the ruling has attracted, the charity made a pretty smart call in terms of using resources effectively. Now, with pleasure.
John McDonald.
I can understand the defence of the organisation, but isn't it true this has got nothing to do with this false concern about the expenditure of money? This is about neutralising the RSPCA before they have a new onslaught in trying to repeal the Hunt legislation.
Well, the honourable member is quite right. Of course, there is a smoke screen here, but what I would like to do is actually show exactly why the case is not coherent and has no real rigour to it at all. Now, much of the interest has been about the amount of money that's spent, with concerns expressed that the expense was not justifiable. I disagree. This was a test case, and one based on a high volume of evidence which needed careful examination to determine whether it constituted a strong enough case to bring to court. It's rather ironic that many critics of the cost are also questioning the RSPCA's judgment with regards to prospects of success, when it is in fact the charity's thoroughness at considering whether prosecution was appropriate and their experience of other high-profile criminal prosecutions that allowed them to budget accurately and appropriately. It's also worth noting that the defendants indicated right up until trial that they would defend all charges rigorously. And it's my view that given the importance of this case and the fact that the evidence and public interest tests have been met, the RSPCA had a duty to respond with equal rigour and not to back down in the face of lawbreakers and those guilty of animal cruelty. Indeed, the Charity Commission has vindicated the RSPCA's decision, stating in that letter that I've just quoted that they don't consider the trustees to have breached their duty of prudence. The public interest test is an important one too, and I'd argue that enforcing such an important piece of animal welfare legislation is in the interests of the public, both those who support the law and those who wrongly believe that they are above it.
Rather than worrying about whether the RSPCA is misusing its funds in bringing the prosecution, shouldn't we as taxpayers be criticising the CPS for not being prepared to bring fox hunting prosecutions with the money that we've funded them with?
Exactly.
Well, the honourable member makes an incredibly good point. That is exactly where the focus of our ire should be, not on the RSPCA, which is having to step in to be able to fulfil that work.
That's just been made is entirely and completely incorrect, as I will explain when I come to speak. The CPS will prosecute cases which are referred to.
I thank him for his intervention, but the evidence that we have and the experience we have is that the CPS does not prosecute in the number of ways in which the RSPCA would. And I'm sorry that he disagrees, but that is the experience that we've had in this area. Now, we know that 80% of people in Great Britain felt that there is evidence of people illegally hunting the dogs. Sorry, where there is evidence of people illegally hunting with dogs, they should be prosecuted. 80% of people believe that. We also know that 70% support animal welfare charities bringing private prosecutions against those who they believe to have been illegally hunting, provided their strong evidence, and if the police or CPS, for whatever reason, do not proceed. In other words, the public want the RSPCA to be prosecuting in cases such as the Heythrop Hunt, and to do so is justified by their charitable aims.
Jim Shannon.
Does the Honourable Lady agree with me? She may not, of course, that the RSPCA is in danger of not just being a charity and a campaigning organisation, but it's also in danger of being an investigatory and prosecuting body, and it is pursuing a militant animal rights agenda. That's a concern that we have.
Well, the honourable member probably won't be surprised that I don't agree with him. I think that is quite an extraordinary statement. And I would go back to the words that we quoted at the very beginning of this debate from Richard Martin, one of the founders of the RSPCA. If legislation to protect animals is to be effective, it must be adequately enforced. The evidence is, and I've quoted from the police and other authorities as well, that if the RSPCA didn't do it, it wouldn't be done. Now, let me, it's not fair to the others. I'm sorry, it's not fair to the others. I've been very generous. Now, I want to say, why was this case then brought to the Charity Commission? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Simon Hart.
To emphasise the point, nowhere in any of the comments have I ever suggested the RSPCA should not be allowed to prosecute. She's misleading the House by suggesting that's what I'm recommending. What I'm recommending is the process needs to be reviewed, not the policy.
Order. I think I heard the Honourable Gentleman say that the Honourable Lady was misleading the House, and she certainly was not what I would have told her.
If I did, I did so in error. I know she'll take my comments in the spirit they were intended.
Yes, I think I thank the honourable member for that. I'm not going to go back over the motivation behind bringing this debate. I think we all have our own views about that. It can't be proved. Let me quickly finish, Mr. Chairman, because I know you want to move us on. I simply want to ask then, why was the case brought to the attention of the Charity Commission? And I can only conclude that really what they wanted to do was to try to make the case that that this was basically undermining the RSPCA. That's what this was about, not about the issue of the hunt per se. And that's a cynical move, and it's not worthy of anyone in the public interest, or anyone acting in the public interest or in the interests of animal protection. The UK has a body charged with oversights of charities, the Charity Commission. That body has confirmed it is not investigating the RSPCA because there is nothing to investigate. Moreover, there is a pending Press Complaints Commission case with regards to misleading and inaccurate media coverage. Yet some have persisted in attempts to smear the RSPCA and to question their role as a prosecutor. I will.
For my honourable friend for giving way, and would ask whether she agrees with me that the so-called rebuke referred to earlier from the Charity Commission was actually the usual advice issued to organisations that have been under the media spotlight, and that the RSPCA have already started a review of their procedures because they are confident that they are robust.
I thank the honourable member for her intervention, and she's quite right. The RSPCA had indeed started that before the CPS even mentioned it. The Charity Commissioners even mentioned it. Let me conclude by saying that I welcome this opportunity to put on the record my understanding of how the Heythrop Hunt and other prosecutions demonstrably further the pursuits of the RSPCA's charitable objectives and represent the large number of constituents who've written to me, and I know to many honourable members, about the importance of protecting the RSPCA's important legal work.
Order, I do need to start the wind-ups at 10:40, so Chel Gillam, briefly.
Move away from me, please.
Are you talking to me, madam?
Yes, of course I'm talking to you.
What would you like to say to me today? Anything interesting?
I'd like to repeat, will you move away from me, please?
Why?
Because you're about a foot
Am
away
I too
from me.
close?
Far too close.
How close is too close?
There's a wrong cry over there. Whistle's blowing. There's the fox over there. There's the fox. He's in that field. They're in the field, they're in the field the fox was in. The hounds are in the field the fox was in, they've crossed over. They've gone back in, they're coming round again. Field hunting them on. He's pulling them across now. He's crossed. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Barnfield's blowing the horn up there now. I'm sure it's the same chase still going on.
Between the A44 and the the Stowe Road, they're heading that way.
This horse all foamed up. I'm right behind Sumner, his horse is all foamed up. Here comes the quad bike, 2 quad bikes hammering down this road towards Peace Hill.
They have just been really rough with me, and they're chasing a fox to even load. Still chasing, still on cry, still heading
whistles and hollers somewhere in the wood between the Addlestrop and Chastleton turn.
Still hunting the same one. Okay, thanks.
There's a kill, there's a kill. There's a kill.
No way, this is private land.
You just killed that fox.
There's private land.
Get off this side, get my camera!
I haven't got it.
Let go of me!
This is private land.